The first sign that humanity wasn't alone came not through radio signals or mysterious lights in the sky, but through what looked like a massive flower blooming in Earth's orbit. The crystalline structure unfolded its petals slowly over 3 days, each segment the size of a small moon, casting rainbow reflections across the planet's surface. Dr. Sarah Chun pressed her face against the observation deck window of the International Space Station, her breath fogging the glass as she watched the alien vessel complete its graceful display. After 30 years of searching for extraterrestrial life through SETI protocols, she never imagined first contact would be so beautiful. Mission Control, this is ISS. The structure has stopped expanding. We're reading massive energy signatures, but they're contained within the vessel itself. Sarah spoke into her headset, her voice steady despite the magnitude of what she was witnessing. The response from Houston crackled with tension. Copy that, ISS. Maintain safe distance. Military satellites are repositioning for defensive posture. Sarah shook her head. After decades of studying the cosmos, she recognized the mathematical precision in the alien craft's design. This wasn't a weapon, it was art. Engineering elevated to the level of poetry. Whatever intelligence had created this understood beauty in ways that transcended species. 3 hours after the vessel finished its display, a stream of light emerged from its center. Not a weapon beam, but something far more unprecedented. A communication signal that bypassed every known form of electromagnetic transmission and spoke directly to human minds in perfect, emotionally rich language. The message reached every person on Earth simultaneously, causing the greatest moment of unified experience in human history. Leaders stopped their meetings, children paused their games, and lovers held each other closer as the alien words formed in their consciousness. We are the HFY Collective, seekers of the living flame that burns within sentient beings. We have traveled across the galaxy not as conquerors, but as supplicants. Our civilization spans 1,000 worlds, commands technologies that can reshape matter itself, and has existed for millions of your years. Yet we come to you, young species of the blue world, because we face an enemy that our vast knowledge cannot defeat: despair. The telepathic voice carried with it images and emotions that painted a picture of unimaginable scope. The HFY showed themselves as beings of pure energy contained within crystalline forms, their thoughts visible as cascading light patterns. They had evolved beyond physical form eons ago, becoming creatures of living mathematics and conscious light. But their advanced nature had become their downfall. In perfecting themselves, they had lost something crucial that lesser species possessed naturally. They called it the burning will, the irrational, passionate determination that drove beings to fight against impossible odds, not because logic suggested success, but because surrender was simply unthinkable. We have watched your species from afar. The message continued, accompanied by images of human history that showed moments of incredible courage and determination. We observed your ancestors leaving caves to face predators with nothing but stone tools. We witnessed your explorers crossing dangerous oceans in wooden ships. We saw your scientists pursuing knowledge despite persecution, your artists creating beauty in the face of destruction, your ordinary people standing against tyranny even when defeat seemed certain. Sarah felt tears forming in her eyes as she understood the profound irony. Humanity, barely capable of sustained spaceflight, was being sought out by godlike beings because humans possessed something that all their technology couldn't replicate: the stubborn refusal to give up. The message shifted, showing images from across the galaxy that made Sarah's stomach clench with fear. Vast regions of space appeared empty, but not naturally empty. These were scars in reality itself, places where entire star systems had been consumed by something the HFY called the Void Devourers. These entities existed in the spaces between dimensions, feeding on the life force of entire worlds. They consumed not just matter and energy, but hope itself, leaving behind regions where even the possibility of life could never again take root. The HFY, for all their power, had watched helplessly as sector after sector fell to this cosmic horror. We can calculate probabilities with perfect accuracy, the aliens explained. We can see every possible outcome of any conflict. Against the Void Devourers, every calculation shows the same result: inevitable defeat. Our logic tells us to withdraw to the furthest edges of the galaxy and accept the slow extinction of all life. But your species performs the impossible daily. You succeed not despite impossible odds, but because you refuse to accept them. The communication showed the true scope of what was at stake. The Void Devourers had already consumed a quarter of the galaxy. They moved slowly but inexorably, and their next target was a region containing thousands of inhabited worlds, including the path that would eventually lead them to Earth's solar system. We offer you our knowledge, our technology, our resources. In return, we ask only that you teach us how to hope when hope is illogical, how to fight when fighting is futile, how to burn with the determination that has carried your species from caves to stars in mere moments of cosmic time. As the message ended, Sarah realized that humanity stood at the threshold of the greatest challenge in the history of life itself. They weren't being asked to be foot soldiers in someone else's war. They were being asked to be teachers, to show beings of unimaginable power how to find the strength to stand against the darkness when every rational voice screamed for retreat. Looking out at the crystalline vessel hanging in Earth's orbit like a prayer made manifest, Sarah Chen smiled. Humanity had always been at its best when the odds were worst. For the first time in human history, the entire species had a common enemy and a clear purpose. The real question wasn't whether humanity would accept the Kethmiran's plea for help. The question was whether the galaxy was ready for what humans could accomplish when they had something truly worth fighting for. Down on Earth's surface, in cities and villages across the globe, 7 billion humans began to understand that they were no longer alone, and that the universe needed exactly what they had always possessed in abundance: the beautiful, irrational, unstoppable determination to keep fighting long after any reasonable being would have given up. The age of human expansion into the galaxy was about to begin, not through conquest, but through the teaching of hope itself. 6 months after first contact, the abandoned Cheyenne Mountain facility had been transformed into something that would have seemed impossible to previous generations: a training ground where humans taught aliens how to refuse defeat. Commander Jack Morrison watched as crystalline beings that existed as pure consciousness struggled with the most basic human concept: acting without guarantee of success. The Kethmiran had shared their technology freely, uploading centuries of scientific advancement directly into human minds. Now humanity possessed faster-than-light travel, matter manipulation capabilities, and weapons that could crack planets. But the aliens still couldn't grasp the simple human ability to keep trying when logic said to quit. "Let me get this straight," Morrison said to the Kethmiran entity designated as Scholar Prime Veltar. The alien's crystalline form pulsed with frustrated blue light as it hovered 3 feet above the reinforced floor. "You can calculate the exact trajectory of every particle in a supernova, but you can't understand why a human would run into a burning building to save someone they've never met." Veltar's response came as direct thought transmission, accompanied by complex mathematical proofs. The probability of successfully rescuing an unknown individual from a structure fire, when weighed against the risk to one's own existence, results in a negative value outcome. The logical choice is to contact emergency services and maintain safe distance. Morrison laughed, a sound that seemed to physically puzzle the alien. "That's exactly the problem. You're thinking of it as a math equation instead of understanding what drives us to act." The training program had been Dr. Chen's idea, developed after she realized that the Kethmiran couldn't simply download human determination like they downloaded human knowledge. They needed to experience what it meant to hope against hope, to fight not because victory was likely, but because defeat was unacceptable. Across the facility, similar conversations were taking place. Master Sergeant Rosa Valdez worked with a group of Kethmiran military strategists, trying to explain why the famous Battle of Thermopylae was studied not as a defeat, but as inspiration. 300 Spartans against hundreds of thousands, she explained to the assembled aliens, whose forms shifted between colors as they processed information. They knew they would die. The math was simple, but they held the pass anyway, buying time for their people to prepare. Sometimes the most important victories look like defeats to anyone who's only counting numbers. The Kethmiran struggled with this concept. In their millions of years of existence, they had optimized themselves for efficiency, logic, and perfect decision-making. The idea of choosing a course of action that logic condemned was as foreign to them as their energy-based existence was to humans. Dr. Lisa Park, a child psychologist recruited for the program, had perhaps the most challenging assignment, teaching hope to beings who could see the future with mathematical precision. She sat in a circle with young Kethmiran entities, their crystalline forms smaller and more fluid than their elders. Hope isn't about knowing things will work out, she explained, her voice gentle. Hope is about believing that working towards something good is worthwhile, even if you can't guarantee the outcome. It's the difference between a logical assessment and an emotional commitment to a better future. One of the young aliens, its form pulsing with curious green light, transmitted a question. But if our calculations show 97.3% probability of failure in the coming conflict with the Void Devourers, how can hope change those numbers? Dr. Park smiled. Hope doesn't change the math. Hope changes you. When you hope, you start looking for possibilities your calculations missed. You start working harder, thinking more creatively, refusing to accept limitations that seemed absolute. Sometimes hope literally creates new possibilities that didn't exist before you started believing in them. Meanwhile, in the facility's largest chamber, something unprecedented was taking place. Human engineers worked alongside Kethmiran technicians to develop new weapons and strategies against the Void Devourers. But this collaboration had revealed something neither species expected. Human unpredictability was actually a tactical advantage. Chief Engineer Miguel Santos stood before a holographic display showing the galaxy's defensive grid. The Kethmiran had calculated the most efficient placement for defensive stations, creating a mathematical masterpiece of interconnected barriers. It was logically perfect and utterly predictable. The problem is, Santos explained to the assembled aliens and humans, the Void Devourers have had millions of years to observe how advanced civilizations think. They expect logical responses. They've probably already calculated every possible defensive strategy an efficient society might employ. He gestured to a new configuration that looked chaotic compared to the Kethmiran design. But this setup doesn't make logical sense. It's got redundancies where they shouldn't be needed, weak points that seem stupid to leave open, and resource allocations that any rational military would consider wasteful. The beauty is that no enemy could predict it because no logical analysis would suggest it. The Kethmiran present pulsed with confused orange light. Commander Veltar transmitted, "You are proposing intentional inefficiency as a defensive strategy?" "Not inefficiency," Santos corrected. "Unpredictability. The strength of human thinking is that we don't always optimize for the same variables. Sometimes we choose courage over safety. Sometimes we choose compassion over efficiency. Sometimes we choose beauty over practicality. That randomness makes us incredibly hard to predict or counter." As weeks passed, something remarkable began to happen. The younger Kethmiran started to exhibit behaviors their species had never seen before. They began taking risks for no logical reason, pursuing ideas that their calculations couldn't justify, and, most surprisingly, experiencing what they described as pleasure in uncertainty. The breakthrough came during a simulation exercise. The scenario was grim. A Void Devourer had consumed 3-star systems and was approaching a heavily populated sector. All logical strategies resulted in either retreat or catastrophic losses. A young Kethmiran named Echo, who had been working closely with human trainers, suddenly projected a new strategy. Instead of calculating the most efficient defensive deployment, Echo proposed something that violated every principle of their military doctrine: a direct assault on the Void Devourer's feeding apparatus, with no backup plan and minimal chance of success. "The mathematics are terrible," Echo admitted, its crystalline form flickering with nervous purple light. "But, while analyzing human historical battles, I experienced something I cannot categorize. When I imagine our forces carrying out this attack, despite the poor odds, I feel energized, motivated beyond rational parameters. Is this what humans call hope?" The simulation ran with Echo's irrational plan. Against all logical expectations, it worked. Not because the mathematics changed, but because the desperate, all-or-nothing approach created opportunities that conservative strategies couldn't access. The simulated Void Devourer, accustomed to facing predictable, efficient responses, couldn't adapt quickly enough to the chaotic human-inspired tactics. Commander Morrison felt a chill of excitement as he watched the results. Echo Way, I think you just learned something that's going to save the galaxy. You learned how to be magnificently, irrationally human. But even as the training program showed remarkable success, long-range sensors brought troubling news. The Void Devourers had accelerated their advance, consuming entire sectors faster than ever before. It was as if they sensed the growing alliance between humans and Kethmaran and were racing to strike before the collaboration could mature. Dr. Chun, now serving as the liaison between species, received the most disturbing report yet. 3 Kethmaran outposts had gone silent in the Andromeda region, not destroyed, but somehow changed. The last transmission spoke of Kethmaran entities losing their ability to feel the burning will they had been learning from humans. It's not just consuming matter and energy anymore, Chen explained to the assembled council of humans and aliens. The Void Devourers are evolving. They're learning to feed specifically on hope and determination. The very qualities we're teaching the Kethmaran are being targeted and drained away. The implications were terrifying. The enemy wasn't just powerful, it was adapting to counter humanity's greatest strength. The question now wasn't just whether they could teach hope to an entire galactic civilization. The question was whether they could do it fast enough, and whether hope itself could survive what was coming. As reports came in of more worlds going silent, their populations left alive but somehow emptied of all will to resist, humanity faced its greatest test yet. They had taken on the role of teachers, but now they would have to prove that what they were teaching could survive contact with an enemy that specialized in destroying the very essence of what made life worth living. The real war for the galaxy's soul was about to begin. The first human Kethmaran joint fleet launched from Earth's orbit on a Tuesday that would be remembered as either the beginning of galactic salvation or the day hope went to die. Admiral Sarah Chun, promoted from her position as a xenobiologist to fleet commander in the span of 8 months, stood on the bridge of the hybrid vessel Indomitable Spirit and tried not to think about the impossibility of their mission. Behind them, Earth had been transformed into a fortress world. Every nation had contributed to the war effort, setting aside centuries of conflicts to focus on the greater threat. The Kethmaran had shared their matter manipulation technology, allowing humans to build defensive structures that rose from the planet's crust like living mountains. But everyone knew that if this mission failed, Earth's defenses would only buy time, not victory. Admiral, we're receiving the final tactical update from the Kethmaran High Command, reported Lieutenant Commander Torres, her human voice mixing with the crystalline harmonic of her Kethmaran counterpart, Scholar Tactician Rhythm LS, who had volunteered to undergo the experimental consciousness linking procedure that allowed perfect coordination between the species. The tactical display showed the scope of what they faced. The Void Devourer known as the Hunger of Worlds had consumed 17 star systems in the past 3 months. Each time it fed, it grew not just in size but in intelligence, adapting its feeding patterns to counter any resistance it encountered. Worse, the psychic emanations from its feeding process were beginning to affect worlds hundreds of light years away, draining the will to fight from populations that had never even seen the enemy. Range to target? Chen asked, though she knew the answer. They all did. The Kethmaran's perfect mathematical minds had calculated every detail of this approach countless times. 14 hours, 37 minutes to optimal engagement range, came the dual response from Torres and Rhythm ALS. Chen nodded and activated ship-wide communications. The message would reach not just the 200 vessels of their joint fleet, but every world in the Allied network. This is Admiral Chun. In 14 hours, we will engage an enemy that has never known defeat. Our Kethmaran allies could have fought this battle with perfect efficiency, optimized strategies, and logical deployment of resources. Instead, they chose to fight alongside us, knowing that human irrationality might be our only advantage. She paused, looking out at the stars that might soon be consumed by absolute darkness. What we're about to attempt defies every rational analysis. We're going to fly directly into the feeding apparatus of a cosmic horror that has devoured civilizations older and more powerful than either of ours. We're going to do this not because our chances are good, but because the alternative is to let evil win through our inaction. In the fleet's various vessels, humans and Kethmaran prepared for battle in their own ways. The humans checked weapons, said prayers, and told stories about heroes who had faced impossible odds. The Kethmaran, still learning the art of hope, practiced what they had come to call determination meditation, deliberately choosing to believe in outcomes their calculations couldn't support. On the hybrid vessel Defiance, Captain Maria Santos worked with her Kethmaran co-captain Velthara to finalize their ship's most unusual feature, a crew composed entirely of bonded human Kethmaran pairs. The experiment had been controversial, requiring volunteers from both species to undergo consciousness linking that could potentially drive either party insane. The linkage is holding stable across all 37 pairs, reported Chief Medical Officer Dr. Kim Park, herself linked with the Kethmaran healer philosopher Dance of Light. The humans are providing emotional stability and creative thinking, while the Kethmaran are supplying processing power and technical knowledge. It's like having the best of both species in every decision. But it was aboard the unstoppable will that the most radical experiment was taking place. The entire ship had been volunteered by its crew for something the Kethmaran called hope amplification. Using their advanced understanding of consciousness, they had created a technological method for sharing and strengthening the human capacity for determination. Commander Jake Rodriguez felt the hope of every crew member flowing through the ship's systems like liquid fire. 800 human minds, all focused on the same impossible goal, not just surviving the encounter with the Void Devourer, but finding a way to hurt something that had never been meaningfully damaged. "It's incredible," whispered his science officer, Dr. Lisa Wong. "I can feel everyone's determination. Martinez's refusal to give up, Thompson's protective anger for his kids back home, Johnson's pure stubborn streak. It's like every human strength is amplified and shared." The Kethmaran monitoring the experiment were experiencing something they had never imagined possible: artificial hope. Through their technological interface with human emotion, they began to understand what their species had lost in their pursuit of perfect logic. Hope wasn't just belief in positive outcomes. It was the decision to keep fighting for something better regardless of the odds. As the fleet approached the Void Devourer, long-range sensors revealed the true horror of what they faced. The entity wasn't just large, it existed across multiple dimensions simultaneously. Physical weapons would damage only a fraction of its being, while energy attacks would be absorbed and converted into more feeding power. "Admiral," reported the fleet's chief scientist, Dr. Elizabeth Harper, her voice tight with fear, "the entity is already adapting to our presence. It's analyzing our fleet composition, our movement patterns, even our communication frequencies. It's learning how to counter us before we even engage." Chen nodded grimly. This was exactly what they had expected. All ships implement protocol chaos. What happened next would have horrified any traditional military strategist. Instead of maintaining formation and following battle plans, the human vessels began moving in seemingly random patterns. Some accelerated toward the enemy, others veered away at sharp angles, and a few began spinning in complex spirals that served no apparent tactical purpose. The Kethmaran vessels, their crews now infected with human unpredictability, abandoned their own logical formations and began improvising. Ships that should have maintained safe distances suddenly charged forward, while heavy assault vessels began executing the kind of evasive maneuvers typically reserved for scouts. "The Void Devourer is showing signs of confusion," reported Dr. Harper, amazement creeping into her voice. "Its adaptation algorithms are cycling through thousands of counter-strategies per second, but they're all based on logical behavior patterns. It can't predict what we're going to do because we don't know what we're going to do." The first phase of the battle was unlike anything in recorded galactic history. Human vessels, crewed by beings who had evolved to hunt predators with stone tools, flew directly at tentacles of living darkness that could unmake matter itself. Kethmaran ships, guided by million-year-old intelligences that had learned to hope in the past 8 months, performed impossible maneuvers that their own calculations said should result in immediate destruction. Captain Santos found herself laughing as the Defiance dove through what sensors said was a cloud of weaponized despair. Velthara, are you feeling what I'm feeling? Her Kethmiron co-captain's crystalline form pulsed with brilliant gold light. If you mean the irrational certainty that we can accomplish the impossible, then, yes. I believe this is what humans call being absolutely crazy enough to work. But, as the battle progressed, the Void Devourer began to adapt more quickly than anyone had hoped. It started copying human unpredictability, using chaos against the fleet. Worse, it began projecting waves of pure despair that could penetrate even the best mental shielding. On the unstoppable will, Commander Rodriguez watched in horror as his hope-amplified crew began succumbing to the entity's psychic attacks. The shared determination that had made them so strong was also making them vulnerable to shared despair. Admiral, he transmitted to Chun, his voice strained, we need to try the final protocol. The one we all voted we'd probably never be desperate enough to use. Chun felt her heart sink. The final protocol had been suggested by a human philosopher working with Kethmiron consciousness specialists. It was based on the observation that humanity's greatest acts of heroism often came not from groups, but from individuals who chose to sacrifice everything for others. All ships, Chen broadcast, her voice steady despite what she was about to ask, implement final protocol. Volunteer basis only. No one is ordered to participate. Across the fleet, a decision was made that would echo across the galaxy for millennia. Not every ship volunteered, but enough did. These vessels began flying directly into the Void Devourer's core, not to attack it, but to do something far more dangerous, to offer their crews hope and determination as bait, drawing the entity's feeding apparatus toward them while other ships prepared to strike at its newly exposed vital systems. It was suicide with a purpose, death chosen not from despair but from absolute, unshakable hope that their sacrifice would matter. The Void Devourer, evolved to feed on surrender and despair, had never encountered beings who chose death as an expression of defiant optimism. As the first volunteer ships disappeared into the entity's feeding apparatus, something unprecedented happened. The Void Devourer began to convulse, its feeding process disrupted by trying to digest hope so pure and determined that it acted like poison in its system. Admiral Chun watched the tactical display and realized they had found the enemy's weakness. The Void Devourers could consume despair, fear, and surrender, but they couldn't digest hope that chose to die rather than compromise itself. All remaining ships, she ordered, her voice ringing with the kind of certainty that had carried humans from caves to stars, begin final assault. Target the disrupted feeding chambers. We're going to kill this thing with the one weapon it can't counter: the refusal to let evil win. The real battle for the galaxy's soul had just begun, and, for the first time since the Void Devourers had first appeared in the universe, one of them was learning what it meant to be afraid. The Void Devourer, called the Hunger of Worlds, had never experienced pain before, and its first taste of agony came from trying to digest pure, undiluted human hope. As the volunteer ships disappeared into its feeding apparatus, their crew's final thoughts weren't of fear or regret, but of absolute certainty that their deaths would save others. The entity convulsed across 17 dimensions, its feeding process disrupted by trying to consume something that grew stronger when faced with destruction. Admiral Chen watched the tactical display as impossible readings flooded her screens. Dr. Harper, tell me what I'm seeing. The fleet's chief scientist stared at her instruments with disbelief. The entity's dimensional cohesion is destabilizing. It's like, imagine a stomach trying to digest something that makes it more nutritious when it's being broken down. The volunteer ships aren't just disrupting its feeding process, they're actually poisoning it with concentrated determination. On the bridge of the indomitable spirit, Chen's Kethmiron co-commander, Veltar Prime, pulsed with colors that had no names in either language. Admiral Chen, my people's calculations are producing results that violate our understanding of reality. The probability matrices for this battle have begun showing outcomes that exceed 100% success rates. How is this possible? Chen smiled grimly. Veltar, you're seeing what happens when humans decide the universe itself is wrong. Sometimes hope doesn't follow probability. Sometimes hope creates its own reality. The Void Devourer's pain transmitted across space as a psychic scream that reached every inhabited world in the sector. But instead of the usual wave of despair that accompanied its feeding, this scream carried something else: fear. For the first time in its existence, spanning millions of years, the cosmic horror was afraid. Captain Santos, aboard the Defiance, felt the entity's fear wash over her consciousness and laughed with savage joy. "Velthera, do you feel that? It's scared. A creature that's devoured entire civilizations is actually afraid of us." Her Kethmiron co-captain's crystalline form blazed with fierce white light. "I am experiencing something my species has no precedent for. The desire to cause suffering to something that has caused suffering to others. Is this what humans call justice?" "Close enough," Santos replied. Then, opened communications to the assault squadrons. "All ships, the target is destabilized. Begin pattern Omega attacks on the exposed feeding chambers. Remember, we're not just fighting for our species. We're fighting for every species that ever existed and everyone that ever will exist." The pattern Omega assault was another example of human tactical thinking that defied Kethmiron logic. Instead of concentrating firepower on single targets, the remaining fleet spread out to attack every vulnerable point simultaneously. It was inefficient by mathematical standards, but it prevented the entity from adapting to any single attack pattern. Commander Rodriguez aboard the Unstoppable will coordinated the most dangerous part of the assault. His hope-amplified crew was preparing to enter the entity's feeding apparatus while it was still convulsing, attempting to place charges directly on its core systems. It was beyond suicidal. It was volunteering to be consumed by cosmic horror for the chance to hurt it from the inside. "Will, this is Admiral Chun. You don't have to do this. We've proven the entity can be hurt. We can develop other strategies." Rodriguez's response came through the quantum communicator with absolute calm. "Admiral, with respect, you're thinking like a Kethmiron. You're looking for the logical solution. But this isn't a problem that logic can solve. Sometimes the only way to kill a monster is to be willing to become its food while carrying a bomb in your belly." The Unstoppable will dove into the entity's main feeding orifice, its hull beginning to dissolve from dimensional stress before it had even fully entered. But its hope-amplified crew maintained their determination even as their bodies began to break down. They didn't just accept their deaths, they embraced them as the price of victory. What happened next would be debated by xenobiologists and philosophers for centuries. As the Unstoppable will reach the entity's core systems, something unprecedented occurred. The concentrated hope and determination of its crew didn't just disrupt the Void Devourer's feeding process. It began converting the entity's own dark energy into something else. Dr. Harper's instruments registered readings that shouldn't have been possible. "Admiral, the entity is undergoing some kind of transformation. Its dark energy matrices are. I don't know how to describe this. They're becoming creative instead of destructive." The Void Devourer's death throes lasted for 6 hours and changed the fundamental nature of the space it occupied. Instead of the empty void that usually marked where these entities had fed, the region began generating new matter and energy. Stars began to form from the creature's transformed essence, and planets coalesced from the creative force that hope had somehow awakened within it. But the victory came at a cost that sobered the celebration. Of the 200 ships that had begun the battle, only 67 remained. Over 30,000 humans and Kethmiron had died in the engagement, including the entire crew of the Unstoppable Will and the volunteer ships that had sacrificed themselves to poison the entity with pure determination. Admiral Chen found herself standing in the ship's memorial chamber, staring at the names of the dead and struggling with the weight of command. She had asked beings to die not for their own worlds or families, but for an abstract principle, that hope should exist in the universe. Veltar Prime found her there, its crystalline form dim with what Chun had learned to recognize as grief. "Admiral, I have been attempting to calculate the value of what we accomplished against the cost in lives. The mathematical result is troubling." "Let me guess," Chun said, her voice heavy with exhaustion. "The numbers don't add up. The cost was too high for what we achieved." "Precisely. By any logical analysis, This engagement was wasteful of resources and lives. And yet, the Kethmiron paused, its form flickering with confused colors. I find myself experiencing what I believe you would call pride in what we accomplished. How can I feel satisfaction with a logically suboptimal outcome? Chun turned to face her alien companion. Because, Veltar, you're finally understanding what hope really means. Hope isn't about achieving optimal outcomes. Hope is about believing that doing the right thing matters, even when the cost is terrible. The news of the Void Devourer's death spread across the galaxy at faster-than-light speeds, but the reaction wasn't the celebration that might have been expected. Instead, the various species of the Kethmiron Collective found themselves grappling with a philosophical crisis that threatened to tear their civilization apart. On the crystal worlds of the core systems, Kethmiron philosophers debated whether their alliance with humanity had saved them or doomed them to a new form of madness. Some argued that learning hope from humans had given them the strength to fight the Void Devourers. Others insisted that hope was a dangerous infection that would lead to the same chaos and inefficiency that had marked human civilization. But the debate became academic when long-range sensors detected something that made every mathematical model obsolete. The death of the Hunger of Worlds had sent shockwaves across dimensional space, and those shockwaves were having an unexpected effect on the remaining Void Devourers. Dr. Chun, now promoted to Fleet Admiral and tasked with coordinating the galaxy's defense, received the report with a mixture of elation and terror. Say that again, Dr. Harper. The other Void Devourers are changing their behavior patterns, Harper reported, her voice tight with excitement and fear. They've stopped their systematic consumption of star systems and are moving toward the site of the battle. All of them. Every Void Devourer in the galaxy is converging on this location. The implications were staggering. Either the death of one of their kind had enraged the entities beyond all reason, or something about the way it had died had attracted them like a signal they couldn't ignore. In 6 months, the combined fleets of humanity and the Kethmiron Collective would face not one cosmic horror, but all of them at once. Admiral, Veltar Prime transmitted, its crystalline form pulsing with newly learned determination. I believe the humans have an expression for this situation. Chen nodded grimly. Yeah, we're about to find out if hope can save the galaxy, or if we just taught an entire civilization how to die beautifully. The final battle for existence itself was approaching, and this time, there would be nowhere to retreat to. Every living thing in the galaxy would either learn to hope together, or be consumed by the darkness that had fed on despair since the beginning of time. The convergence began as pinpricks of absolute darkness against the star field, but within weeks, the entire galaxy could see what was coming. 17 Void Devourers, each the size of a solar system, moved through space toward the site where their brother had died. They came not in the slow, methodical advance that had marked their previous conquests, but with desperate speed, as if something about the death of the Hunger of Worlds had awakened a terrible urgency in their ancient minds. Fleet Admiral Sarah Chun stood in the command center of New Hope Station, humanity's greatest engineering achievement built in the 4 months since the first victory. The station was a fusion of human determination and Kethmiron technology, a massive structure that served as both fortress and symbol. Its very existence declared that life would not retreat any further. Final fleet count, Commander Torres, Chun requested, though she knew the numbers by heart. She had memorized every ship, every crew member, every weapon system in the greatest armada ever assembled. 8,437 vessels from 43 different species, Admiral Torres reported. The Kethmiron provided the technology, but everyone else provided something equally valuable: the willingness to fight when logic says to run. The alliance that had formed in response to the approaching convergence was unprecedented in galactic history. Species that had been enemies for millennia stood together in the same fleet. The warlike Krextai brought their planet-killer weapons, the peaceful Whispering Clouds contributed their reality-shaping abilities, and dozens of other civilizations offered whatever strength they possessed. But it was the humans who had become the spiritual center of the alliance, not through any claim of superiority, but because they alone had demonstrated that hope could kill the unkillable. In the months since the first battle, human determination had become a philosophy studied by scholars across the galaxy. Admiral Chen walked through the station's memorial halls, where crystalline walls displayed the names of every being who had died fighting the Void Devourers. The list had grown to over 2 million names, but instead of crushing morale, the memorial had become a source of strength. Beings from hundreds of worlds came to read the names and understand that they were part of something larger than any individual species or planet. Dr. Elizabeth Harper found Chun in the memorial hall, her expression grim. "Admiral, we've completed the analysis of the approaching entities. The news is complicated." "Define complicated, Doctor." Harper activated a holographic display that showed the galaxy with 17 massive wounds moving through space. "They're not just converging on our location. They're changing. The death of the hunger of worlds has done something to them that we don't fully understand. They're becoming more than they were." The display zoomed in on the nearest Void Devourer, revealing structures that hadn't existed before. They're developing what can only be described as organs of adaptation. Not just the ability to counter our weapons, but the ability to counter our hope itself. They've learned that hope was what killed their brother, and they're evolving specifically to consume it. Chun felt a chill that had nothing to do with the station's temperature. "How long do we have?" 72 hours until the first of them reaches our perimeter." "Admiral, I need to tell you something else. The quantum resonance patterns suggest that when they arrive, they won't attack us separately. They're going to link together into a single entity. We'll be facing something with the combined power of every Void Devourer that has ever existed." In the days that followed, preparation for the final battle took on an almost religious intensity. Across the galaxy, beings who had never believed in anything beyond logic or survival found themselves learning human concepts like prayer, sacrifice, and faith. The Kethmaran, who had once existed as pure mathematical consciousness, began composing what they called hope equations, formulas that calculated not probability, but possibility. Commander Jake Rodriguez, sole survivor of the Unstoppable Will, worked with volunteers from every allied species to develop the final strategy. They called it the Genesis Protocol, and it was based on a simple, terrifying premise. If the Void Devourers had evolved to consume hope, then hope would have to evolve to destroy them. "The idea is dangerous," Rodriguez explained to the assembled fleet commanders. "We're not just talking about sharing determination across species. We're talking about fundamentally changing what hope means. Instead of hope for survival or victory, we're proposing hope for transformation, the belief that even ultimate evil can be redeemed." The plan horrified the military strategists from most species, but the humans and the hope-trained Kethmiran understood its awful logic. They would not try to kill the approaching entities. Instead, they would try to do to all 17 Void Devourers what had accidentally happened to the Hunger of Worlds, transform their nature from destructive to creative. As the final hours approached, Chen found herself in the station's observation deck, watching the approach of cosmic horror with something approaching serenity. Beside her, Veltar Prime had evolved beyond its original crystalline form, its consciousness now wreathed in patterns that looked almost organic. "Admiral, I have been contemplating the mathematics of what we are attempting," the Kethmiran transmitted. "The probability of success is so low that our computers cannot calculate a meaningful percentage. And yet, I find myself experiencing what I can only describe as absolute certainty that we will succeed." Chen smiled. "Veltar, that's the most human thing you've ever said. You've learned to believe in the impossible." When the Void Devourers arrived, they came as a single entity that dwarfed solar systems. The combined horror stretched across light years of space, a living wound in reality that radiated such concentrated despair that several outer rim worlds simply surrendered their will to live at the sight of it. But the Allied fleet did not retreat. 8,000 ships, carrying the hope of every living thing in the galaxy, accelerated directly toward the cosmic horror. They came not as an army seeking victory, but as teachers offering the most dangerous lesson in the universe, that love could exist even for the thing that sought to destroy everything. The Genesis Protocol activated as the first ships entered the entity's feeding range. Instead of shields or weapons, they projected pure, concentrated hope directly into the darkness. But This was hope transformed by humanity's greatest insight, that the ultimate act of defiance against evil was not to destroy it, but to believe it could be redeemed. What followed was not a battle in any traditional sense. The Void Devourers began feeding on the projected hope, expecting it to weaken and die as they consumed it. Instead, they found themselves consuming something that grew stronger with every attempt to destroy it. The hope the Allied fleet projected was hope for the Void Devourers themselves, hope that beings of such power could choose creation over destruction. Commander Rodriguez's ship, the new Unstoppable, dove deepest into the entity's form. As his crew died around him, he maintained contact with the combined entity's consciousness, speaking words that no being had ever spoken to cosmic horror. "We forgive you. We believe you can be better. We hope for your redemption." The Void Devourer's death scream lasted for 7 days and was heard across 17 galaxies. But it was not the cry of something being destroyed. It was the birth cry of something being born. As the entities died, their essence transformed into something that had never existed before. Creative force that actively sought to nurture life rather than consume it. Admiral Chun survived to see the aftermath, though she would spend the rest of her life struggling to describe what she witnessed. Where the Void Devourers had died, new galaxies began forming at an accelerated rate. Worlds rich with life emerged from nothing, and species beyond counting found themselves suddenly existing in a universe where hope was not just possible, but fundamental to the structure of reality itself. The cost had been enormous. Less than 1,000 ships survived the engagement, and over 4 million beings had died in the final transformation. But their deaths had accomplished something unprecedented. They had taught the universe itself to hope. In the years that followed, as new civilizations arose in the redeemed regions of space, and existing species discovered abilities they had never imagined, a simple truth became clear. Humanity had not saved the galaxy through superior technology or military might. They had saved it by teaching even cosmic horror that redemption was possible. The Kethmaran, transformed by their contact with humanity, became gardeners of hope, traveling to young civilizations to teach them that determination could overcome any obstacle. Humanity itself spread across the galaxy not as conquerors, but as teachers of the simple truth that had saved all existence, that the greatest victory over evil was not to destroy it, but to believe it could choose to become good. And in the regions where the Void Devourers had died and been reborn as creative force, new species arose that carried within their very genetics the understanding that hope was not just an emotion, but the fundamental force that allowed anything good to exist in a universe that would otherwise choose chaos. The age of humanity had begun not through conquest, but through the simple act of refusing to believe that anything, no matter how dark, was beyond redemption. It was, perhaps, the most human victory of all, saving the universe not through strength, but through the stubborn insistence that love could win even when logic said it was impossible. Admiral Chin spent her final years establishing the Hope Academies on worlds throughout the galaxy, where beings of all species could learn the simple, revolutionary truth that had saved everything. That the greatest force in the universe was not power or knowledge or technology, but the humble, irrational, unstoppable decision to keep believing that things could always get better. The galaxy had learned to hope, and, in doing so, had chosen to live.